Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war frontline update for the 6th of June, D-Day, commemoration day, 2025. And embarrassingly, this is a 2-week update. This is now the longest I think I've ever gone without doing a frontline update. And for that, I'm truly sorry. This is what happens when everything happens in the world, from all sorts of political upheaval recently to all these crazy missions that the Ukrainians have been doing, and the Russians with a bit of payback, and all sorts happening everywhere around the world concerning this war and in the wider field of geopolitics. So we will have a lot of pins. There will be a lot of changes. Remember, I'm synthesizing two mappers here. Andrew Perpetua, the more objective mapper. Surat Mat's very much a pro-Russian mapper, aligned with the Ministry of Defense there. So we have differences of opinions as to what has happened on the front lines. The pins, remember, the dark blue pins and the cherry red pins indicate movement from the previous Russian defensive lines for Surat maps to the present ones, and the lighter blue and the pink ones are for Andrew Perpetua, a movement in direction of either the Ukrainians if they're blue, and if they're reddish, that is a movement in favor of the Russians. So we're going to start in an area which has a bit of rarity. There are more blue pins and more Ukrainian pins and Russian pins. The movements have been in favor of the Ukrainians. That's in Tetkino, in the Kursk direction. Of course, the Russians pushing back largely in the Sumy area down south of Kursk, where the Ukrainians previously were. Ukrainians sort of holding on a tiny bit over here near the border of Kursk and Sumy, but otherwise the Russians moving down fairly substantially. But further to the west, we have Tetkino, which we are hearing is being surrounded, but surrounded might seem a little bit different to what you might assume. So the Ukrainians are still somewhere away in some areas from Tetkino. So Tetkino is here. There are some areas of it further down to the south where the Ukrainians have been pushing up. They control, the Ukrainians, the area to the west of the river as it comes down here, the same river. And this is still part of Russia, but the Ukrainians control that. The Russians pulled out there. And they have moved up in a number of places. They've moved up this tree line here, the Ukrainians, to an entrenchment there, some fortifications built around the intersection of these two tree lines. And as a result, this area might be contested. There might be Ukrainians here, and there might be Ukrainians up here as well. These are, with some mappers, are contested. Now, why this is significant is because the troops left in Tetkino need to be fed by supplies, and you can't obviously get supplies across the river. Ukrainians control that. It really means coming down this road. That road will be under, no doubt, fire control, certainly drone control. And actually, if the Ukrainians are here and here, then that means this road is even more vulnerable, but also that these dirt tracks, these tractor sort of trails that come down here along this tree line there, and I think there's another one too, these are either under control of the Ukrainians or they are, really dangerous. It's like running the gauntlet for the Russians. So that means they are going to be somewhat cut off, the Russians. It's going to be really difficult for them to get supplies in, and the Ukrainians sort of pushing ever so closer to controlling to taking Tetkino. Now, there have been a number of Russian complaints about what's going on there in terms of, and I read a few of these out to you this morning, subtitles from a few videos saying that there is real issue in terms of a lack of Russian defenses around here, air defense and whatnot. The Ukrainian aviation is hammering the Russians. You've got obviously drone and artillery presence as well, really giving the Russians a hard time. Here's a French, I'll translate it, obviously, French thread on what's going on near Tetkino, in Tetkino. Near Tetkino, Ukrainian armed forces have surrounded Russian soldiers. Z channels are desperate. Quote, all logistics have been cut off. Ukrainian defense forces have surrounded Russian units in the Kursk region. The Russian army has found itself in a very difficult situation in the Kursk region near the village of Tekino. Ukrainian forces are advancing and the Russian armed forces are surrounded. This information was reported on the morning of June the 6th by a television channel, so that's today, recent stuff. The Northern Channel linked to the Russian army. According to the channel, the Ukrainian armed forces have already breached the center of the village. So we've heard this a number of times. Although the mapping doesn't indicate that the Ukrainians are in the center, they might well be fighting right in the center of Tetkino. The situation in the direction of Tetkino is extremely difficult. This is a quote. The enemy is attacking almost continuously, as in the Ukrainians are attacking. The Ukrainian armed forces have advanced into the center of Tetkino, as well as from the southeast to Popovo Lezachi. In fact, all roads are, cut off. Drone and artillery of the Ukrainian armed forces, editor's note, make any attempt at resupply suicidal. Our troops, mainly paratroopers, are surrounded, wrote Channel Z. So really difficult coming in from the southeast over here, also southwest, of course, and really giving the Russians a hard time there. Just to finish off this thread. He stressed that despite the catastrophic situation, the command of the Russian armed forces does not authorize the withdrawal of troops. Moreover, no measures are being taken to reinforce the group in this area. Now, one of the criticisms I was reading out to you this morning in my hits and losses video was that these guys were being claimed to be heroes in Tetkino, the Russian soldiers, by other Russians. But the guy was saying, heroes, you don't leave heroes to be annihilated. Heroism isn't just about fighting to your death and then dying. That's not a good form of heroism. We should be supporting these guys in terms of close air support, artillery, rotation, supplies, all this kind of stuff. But no, they seem to have been left to it. So as you can see there, several directions that the Russians are being attacked in. The Ukrainian Operational Intelligence OSINT project Deep State has not yet confirmed this information. According to the map, the Ukrainian armed forces control just over 11 square kilometers of the Kursk region. At the same time, approximately 10 square kilometers are designated as a combat zone, not controlled by either side, so that's grey zone. And Dialogue UA previously noted the release of footage showing a drone striking a hotel housing Russian military personnel in the Kursk region. We also reported that the military personnel had used HIMARS to attack the Russian forces in the Kursk region, to strike the Russian forces there. So that might well be further to the north. There have been strikes on Rilsk and not so much Lugov, but more Rilsk up here. So this was a staging area for the Russians to provide command and control for the Russian defense of this area when the Russians were being attacked as the Ukrainians came into Kursk. But now Rilsk is still evidently a staging area with lots of military there, is getting hit by missile attacks. But so Tetkino is under a lot of pressure. However, Sumy region just to the east is, things are looking really challenging for the Ukrainians. Now, if you were to be as optimistic as possible, the claims are that they haven't actually reached the major defences along here. This is all land between the border and the first line of major defences. There are theories that the defences are somewhere in this region between the forests and where the Russians are. Now, the challenge is, they are going to be taking these villages. That's almost certainly going to be. Yablunivka is one that keeps getting talked about. But if they take these, then they've got to cross these open fields where they could be very vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. It depends how many troops they have, whether they're going to do these kind of meat assaults that are incredibly labor intensive. They lose an awful lot of people, but they end up taking land. And then, of course, it gets into forest area here. This is Andrew Perpetua's recently, or not recently, but he has previously commented that this is a very difficult area to take. I think once you get past this initial area where they are taking land relatively easily. So just as a point, just in general, the Scruffy Tales did a good analysis of this towards the end of his Frontline update. Go and check out Scruffy Tail's really good channel for what's going on. He did analysis of how many troops the Russians are losing and how much land they're taking. So 2024 was a terrible year for the Russians. They took 0.69% of Ukrainian territory at a cost of 150,000 dead, 400,000 casualties overall. That is an incredibly high number. And he said 2025 is really on track to be the same, where there have been 160,000 casualties so far, and they are taking pretty similar amounts of land. It is equating to about 99 casualties, I think, per square kilometre. Really high numbers of losses. So the question's always been, how long can the Russians keep this up? And there are signs, as there have been for a long time, though, that the Russians are struggling. They are, as I read this morning, taking on coast guards, co-opting them even for the front line potentially, and so on and so forth. But it's very similar to what we've heard essentially over the last couple of years. Convicts are still being used in the Zaporizhia front, we heard this morning. And I say, how long can they keep doing this? And they then continue to do this and extend the war on and on. But, each passing month is going to hurt more and more. They are using far fewer pieces of combat asset equipment. The normal kind of tanks and APCs and IFVs are using a lot more motorcycles, quads, and they can convey an advantage by using them. Of course, they have adapted to the battlefield conditions, but it does also show that they fundamentally lack a lot of really decent equipment. We've seen Koksan 1989, M1989, the North Korean self-propelled guns be used now on the Eastern Front, not just up here around Kursk where they had previously. But anyway, as you can see, the Russians making some pretty large gains down into Sumy from that Kursk region. David D says that Russia is throwing its best forces into Sumy right now. 2 VDV divisions, so they're airborne, 2 VDV brigades, 155th Marines, so naval infantry brigades, 2 plus brigades of artillery, 25 to 30,000 troops. Some people say 50,000 troops. Let's see what Ukraine does about the counter-attack. If they counter and force them back, it would be a major loss for Russia. Ukraine has the forces to counter, but if they use them now, there may not be a summer attack. So there are some theories that Ukraine does have troops in reserve. They have been planning potentially for their own counter-attack in summer. And rather like the decision about Kursk originally, do they put them in towards Pokrovsk to just throw them into making the Russians pay even more for the gains that they are making, or do they try and do something more funky and do their own counter attack to then draw Russian troops away from areas of the front line? They did that with Kursk. It did succeed, but then what happened is the Rubicon units used fiber optic drones to cut off Ukrainian supplies, and that actually led to the collapse of the Kursk front line. It was really difficult because there were only a couple of roads going into where they were at. And the Russians eventually did a good job of pushing them out, but again, it all comes at cost, doesn't it? But the question is, are the Ukrainians going to do similarly? So will they take, if they have these reserves, do you put them into, for example, do you throw them into attacking Tetkino and causing the Russians to think twice about up here and then draw troops away, or do you just throw those troops directly into the front line? Do you rely on the defences working here, having air support? So there is improved air support in these regions. F-16s are working with groups of planes to use aerial guided glide bombs on the Russian, logistics, command and control. I don't know whether they're using them against troops here in the Sumy area, but it could be that you keep a kind of active defense going rather than doing a counterattack. This is a wide front line. This is kind of what Ukraine would have wanted going north, a much wider front line to allow supply into there to exist more easily. They had relatively thin front line that then came out to sort of here, and in the end, they were able to be sort of cut off. Their supply was able to be cut off. So, if they do have the troops, Ukraine, how do they use them? And that's kind of what David is asking there. Now, Tendal says the situation in the Kursk-Sumy front line is that Russians have gained a few villages south of Sumy without breaking through the lines. Ukrainians, on the other hand, keep pressure on Tetkino west of it. As we've seen, according to Russian channels, the Russian units in this town are virtually encircled. So that's how he sees it. And we'll do a thread from Playfry, useful source. Way up north, Russia opened up a new front in Sumy. So this is from June 5th, so yesterday. Hoping to get close enough to the city to control its supply routes and shell it, but Ukraine is opposing fierce resistance, aided by strong brigades and natural obstacles. After the capture of Sverdlovskovo and Nikolaevo Darino, Kursk Oblast already in February 2025, Russian forces started attacking southwards across the state border towards Novenka. So let's go back to that. Where he's talking about is Novenka up here, Sverdlovskovo there, Nikolaevo Darino. So they took this area back and then kept on going. Novenka fell pretty quickly, then Zherebets, and then they've been pushing on and on from there. Playfire continues. Novenka and in the fields between Zherebets and Vasyukivka. After small initial successes, they got rapidly bogged down because the Ukrainian drone crews that were freely hunting them in the open fields were successful, obviously, in a number of capable brigades that had just retreated from the Kursk salient and regrouped around that area. So the Ukrainians were pretty strong there and drones were effective. Seeing that they were effectively stuck, the Russians decided to do what they can do best: lengthen the front, exploiting their superior resources and threatening with encirclement the Ukrainian forces opposing them at the original front line. Facing what was described as a horde of Russian infantry along this front line, the Ukrainians had to retreat further back. So that's that extending the front line further, rather than just attacking here and attacking there. They extended the front line and were able to threaten around the sides, also down here too, of the Ukrainian forces. This retreat, though, was not properly conducted or orderly, the retreat of the Ukrainians, and the Russians were able to exploit more than a gap to advance further than the Ukrainians expected. There are some, I know Scruffy Tales says that actually the Russian advances in this area aren't like massively quick. It does look like an orderly withdrawal, and the same can be said around the Prokos region as well, where they're sort of taking 300 meters a day. If you're only taking 300 meters a day, yes, it does cumulatively add up, and it looks terrible when, you know, if I'm giving a mapping update, you're going to see a lot of change in 2 weeks. But actually that comes at a huge cost, and it is somewhat slow, and it does mean that the Ukrainians aren't just like capitulating, but they are withdrawing in an orderly fashion. Anyway, Playfire continues. This leads us today, where the Russians strongly consolidated their presence in Sumy Oblast along the Kindrativka, Oleksivka, Belovody and Vasyukivka line. So that's what you can see here for different settlements. I'll go back to my map. We're talking about these settlements here. And then you're coming on. So now sort of goes back here, but you're going to be talking about Yablunivka, Yablunivka, and others coming into the sites of the Russians here. Of course, there's a difference between the mappers here. Andrew Perpetua has the Russian line much further back than Surat maps, but you know, that's pretty typical. Okay, so which to them constitutes a great springboard for further offensive operations, which they're trying to expand southwards. To even get close to the city, though, they first need to break through and capture the strong Yastrubny, Khotin, Yablunivka line. That's in this photo. These three names of settlements identify the largest settlements at the halfway point between the border and Sumy city, which makes them perfect staging and accumulation points for both sides. Between the settlements, moreover, lies a very big forested area, which the Russians will use to further accumulate their personnel and vehicles, with the added bonus of solid camouflage. Furthermore, the whole line is located on top of the dominant hill ridge, which is in photo number 3 here. So this is a really useful map. You can see higher ground here, lower ground, Sumy the city in there. You got the forest over here, Khotin there, where you know, they are looking to attack, but they've got to cross all these open fields like I was talking about to get to the forest area. So it is going to be challenging for the Russians there. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, the problem for the Ukrainians, so if I go back to my map, you've got this these forest areas here. You've got these open fields where the Russians are gonna have to cross to get to the forests. You've got Sumy already in sort of drone range, some longer range drones, and you're going to start getting artillery being able to hit it at some point in a not too distant future if the Ukrainians are forced back beyond the forest there. So yeah, it is all rather challenging. So contrary to popular belief, Sumy is defended by outdated fortifications. Until some months ago, we could have said that the region had one of the best defensive lines to protect it of all of Ukraine, together with Zaporizhia. But in such a little time span, the rules of this war were turned upside down by various upgrades to drones by the Russian side especially. That is to testify that this is a war of innovation together with other things. Going back to the fortifications, here are some examples. They might look very big, imposing and powerful trench systems near roads and important objectives, but the truth is that most of the times the soldiers won't even bother to occupy them, or rather take up positions in the tree lines near them, which are multiple times more valuable because of camouflage. Why is camouflage important? Because the war is a war of drones, and you can have the most reinforced dugout in that trench system, but Russian operators can very simply throw at it 10 FPV drones, and you'll have to retreat. But where? In another dugout in the middle of the field that will be immediately targeted again. The pictures represent trench systems around the Sumy city defensive line, and that's a pretty good point. Is like either you're out in the open in these big trench lines, but drones can just fly up and down those trench lines, hammering anything they see, or go into dugout doorways. And tree lines offer actually better protection, at least in the summertime when the foliage is still there. So again, these might be otherwise decent trench configurations. Drones are causing a right old nightmare for the Ukrainians. Anyway, as we go on, obviously Ukraine is not at fault for having built these trench systems, because they were constructed in 2023 when drones weren't playing as big of a part of the war as now, especially fiber optic drones. What they are at fault for, though, is not fixing this problem and not starting to build the so-called guts inside tree lines. In photo 1, you can see a great example of a gut. In particular, this was built by the Russians to counter Ukraine's 2023 summer offensive near Verbove. As you can see, the trench system was mostly covered. Now only a few parts still have covered ways. It was camouflaged in between trees and foliage, rendering Ukrainian reconnaissance virtually impossible in the summer months without literally deleting the tree line. This habit has been mostly lost by Ukrainian engineering forces in the rear that receive orders to build trenches in the open, while it remains in only some of the most static areas of the front line. I'm not a big fan even of the style in photo 2, even though it's better having a camouflage dugout and is still unfinished, having covered way. So I'm just trying to see which are the which is photo number 1 and photo number 2 there. So yeah, this is photo number 1, and that is photo number 2 there. Obviously that's on the outside of the tree line there. If it's not possible to dig guts for whatever reason, photo 3 is the best option, in my opinion. Small independent systems with a dugout, and in this case, unfinished too, covered ways, everything crucially inside the tree line. Ukrainian engineers, though, must use small excavators that do not uproot trees and rather dig between them, so that the situation in photo 3 does not happen. This also has the added benefit of being able to dig closer to the front line, so the excavator can move while camouflaged inside tree lines. Interesting. So getting back to our strategical analysis, here are the exact steps I would take to stabilize this direction if I were the Ukrainian High Command. 1, start digging trench systems in the massive forested areas northeast of Sumy, both at the massif's edge, looking at the fields. This is photo 1. And in the deeper areas of the forest, and immediately place drone operators there. That will also prepare for their smaller positions and enlarge them, expecting a retreat of the infantry in front of them. This forest massif is a great chance of becoming a swamp for Russian forces, just like Crimea. The experienced units are there. Furthermore, it has hard slopes, very dense greenery. It's periodically cut by small clearings, as you can see in photo 2, and even has lakes deep inside the massif as well. Photo 3 there. All of these things together have the potential of turning this area into a living hell for Russian forces. Prepare very solid plans to retreat to the Yablunivka line. Further disorganized retreats cannot be allowed, and Ukraine can't afford to let the Russians into each strategical positions. If necessary, blow the bridges over the Oleshnya River, the river passing through most of the line's towns. Plan kill zones, and the Ukrainian drone operators stationed in a forest massif will be able to easily control. So that is, you dig into this forest area, really, you make that a maze of interconnected sort of lines and whatnot, rather liking the Crimea forest, which has made it very difficult for the Russians to advance there. And then you have kill zones all in this area. I presume the river, there's a river going up there. There must be, different river lines he's talking about. But yes, so that makes rather a lot of sense to me. There are quite a few, as you can see, river areas in and around the forest area too. So, number 3, reinforce the Pisarivka-Yastrubina line rather than the Pisarivka-Unikivka one. The first is much easier to break through than the second, which, as said, presents very hard terrain. So you've got, if we just, here's Pisarivka, and you've got, where are we? Unikivka, Yablunivka. So the idea is it should be Yastrubina. So just trying to work out exactly where he's talking about there. Okay, interesting. So that's to say, here's Pisarivka. Play for Art suggests reinforcing this line because it's much more easy to break through. And that's probably true because you've got the forest here behind the other line he's talking about, Pisarivka, Yablunivka, this kind of line. So, if you spend time reinforcing that, then actually this becomes the preferred option, and then you can try and circle around. You've got the forest here as your natural barrier, so you want to put your big sort of defensive lines around here. But there are, you've got tree lines around there, but there isn't. There's some rivers and whatnot, but essentially that is all open fields over there. And then fourth, buy time for the Richki Mykolaievka Stretskivka line to be reinforced, but don't think twice about withdrawing from positions if needed. Stubbornly holding your positions over a certain limit is the worst mistake in the situation Ukraine is in, especially about manpower. So this is to say, we'll just find those. But so you got Richki over here. So I presume, Mykolaievka. So there are going to be layered defenses. So talking about a defense from here to there and defenses around here as well. But you'd have layered defenses so you can fall back in an orderly manner. Okay. Obviously, these steps are easier said than done to finish in practice. This will take time and effort, both of which Ukraine is limited in. Furthermore, I designed them not knowing what the Ukrainian command knows. The situation must be different than what we imagine it to be. Pretty obvious specifications in my opinion, but just being safe. Personally, I do not think that the Sumy front is inherently dangerous. I strongly think Sumy city will not be captured by Russian forces in this war, first of all because it's not their objective, and secondly because of its characteristics. The city is big. It's not Bakhmut, Pokrovsk or Chasiv big. We're talking about 145 square kilometers, which is 2.5 times the size of Turetsk, 5 times the size of Pokrovsk, and 6 times the size of Milhorad. It looks like the city itself too was built for defensive purposes. Absolutely massive high-rise and industrial areas split in multiple parts by rivers. The whole eastern side defended by the same massive forest, and the flanks secured by sizable cities behind rivers. Even if the Yastrubina, Khotin, Yablunivka line were to be abandoned, the Russians would encounter topographical and orographic nightmare before reaching the city. So the city itself is difficult to take. It is a sizable city, as you can see there, and there are other cities on the way and defensive lines and really difficult terrain around here, which is exactly what Andrew Perpetua was talking about previously. So he says, in conclusion, the Russians do not want and cannot capture the city. For them, capturing the Khotin Heights is more than enough, because from there they will be able to they'll have a stable foothold on into the oblast. but most importantly, they'll be able to shell and strike with drones Sumy city itself, rendering it dead, just like Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, and many, many others. This is the only thing to be worried about. The city falling is not even remotely a possibility. I completely agree with this, and for what it's worth, the problem is always going to be the ability for the Russians to shell Sumy. If you can get artillery close enough and FPV drones like Kherson, at the moment Kherson is completely unlivable in my opinion, and that's the end of Kherson as a viable place to live and therefore work and to contribute to the economy and to just be part of society. Kherson on the Dnipro, obviously it's very close because it's only just over the river, but that's what the Russians can do to a place if they're close enough. So if they can get to these kinds of areas up here, then artillery and drones will be a daily issue for Sumy, and it becomes unlivable. So Max25 saying Russia's breached another section of the border in Sumy region. I know this is going back sometime, actually it's too far ago, that one, so I will ignore that. Right, okay, now we're going to move on to the Vovchansk direction, where the Ukrainians are supposedly advanced a little bit. So we're going to go to the right here. A little bit of gain for the Ukrainians in that area that they still hold, according to Syriac maps. This is around the is it no, where was I? Interesting. I thought, yeah, it is around the there's a monastery around here. Here it is. It's a monastery. I was confusing myself. So the Ukrainians either fought back a little bit there, or there's a bit of rejigging for the for Syriac maps. But the Russians still advancing, if we're to believe Syriac maps, further to the southwest beyond that point. And then when we come down, we don't hear too much about what was happening in Belgorod around Demidovka. Doesn't look like there's any news coming from there. And then we come on to the Kharkiv area, where some gains have been made in the right-hand one, the easterly sector, where as you heard from Syriac maps, the Ukrainians have made some gains around Starytsia and Bugrovatka. But the Russians are gaining within Vovchansk and are now pretty much getting a lot of the city area up to the river back under their control, which is sort of worrying. The Ukrainians were having some success there, and Russians were being forced back when the whole distraction of Kursk was taking place, but that seems to have stopped. And I was wondering why this didn't happen earlier. So the whole Oskil River thing, like getting across the Oskil River, and there are a few gains for the Russians along here, but nothing too significant. But I didn't understand why they didn't come across the border in this area to the north rather than cross the river, which is really difficult, and try and take this land, and supply their troops across the river. That's proving fairly challenging, but it could be that this is just very well mined and protected in that way. But it looks like the Russians are doing that, so this is all a bit of a worry. It's that kind of chip away at all these places that adds up. It all accumulates. Right, then we have a worry for the Ukrainians further down the northeastern front line. Interestingly, in 2 weeks, no change to the Pishchanka front. That is significant. Ukrainians have been pushing back south here of that sector. There's a bit of difference between the mappers, both to the north and to the south of there, but no change at all. But quite considerable change across the Zherebets on the way to the Oskil River, now quite considerably west of Terny. You got Terny and Torska down here. Now, the Ukrainians seem to have pushed back north of Torska. We had seen that previously. I don't know if that's a rejig, because that was before the previous update. It could be that Syriac maps is just slow in accepting Ukrainian advances, but here the Russians definitely having some momentum. That is a worry. I mean, overall, I'm not massively worried about much of this area, but obviously what the Russians take, the Ukrainians have to take back or have to bargain back. So it becomes, a bit of a challenge. Just to let you know as well, just today we're going up to Kupyansk, just here on the Oskil River. There was news, or Tim White has showed this. It has been blown up before, this bridge, I believe. Russia's released footage of it destroying a bridge in southern Kharkiv region. It's near Kupyansk. You can see the remnants of the original permanent structure across the Oskar River a few meters upstream. I don't know exactly where this is. It might be the bridge that is... It's a bridge that is south here. It might be this one here that is being shown there, but I'm not 100% sure if it's there or somewhere else. There are various claims. Actually, I don't even know if it was that one. It might be this one as well. I'm just not sure. That's got you can see, so it's got that that kind of bridge structure there that looks like it could be this. It could be that one then. But anyway, that is a pretty big explosion on that bridge. We're going to come out of there and further to the south and see that, oh my goodness, there are lots of Russian pins here. Of course, we have to remember this is 2 weeks, and that means that we are going to expect lots more pins than we normally would. This is the longest I haven't mapped for. So north of Chasiv Yar, the Russians appear to be continuing to make gains, as according to Survey maps. Andrew Perpetua has a few gains for the Russians in the center of Chasiv Yar. The Ukrainians are still holding out, but it's looking more and more precarious in Chasiv Yar, which means its next step, Konstantinivka sort of thing. And that's somewhat worrying. So hopefully, although, it's now a year beyond when we're expecting Chasiv Yar to fall, by the way, and Ukrainian forces were expecting Chasiv Yar to fall last summer. It didn't. But that there is a continued direction of travel there in that area. Vasyukivka, some small gains there. Is that the one around Vasyukivka? I should know Vasyukivka. That's Vasyukivka. Anyway, some gains supposedly for the Ukrainians somewhere around the Chasiv Yar area, the Bakhmut area. I'm sure it's to the north. Vasyukivka, Sako Ivanseti area. Vasyukivka, there you go. So slight gain there, apparently, according to Grayskull. Just on the other side of that, it looks like that's going to be grey zone, and the Ukrainians taking back some of that grey zone into their control more solidly. But yeah, actually looks like that could be around there, that area by Vasyukivka. Okay, so anyway, doesn't really appear on our map. And then the Russians making these advances in all over the shop, really, including north of Turetsk. So they're advancing around Dachnia, according to Survey maps. Not so much according to Andrew Perpetua in all of these areas. But Andrew does have the Russians making some advances from the... this is from... I forget the name of this now, but it's where the railway line comes into this junction. I forget the name anyway, because it doesn't render on the map. But you got the junction and then the canal that goes up. They are moving west of there, the Russians. But according to Survey maps, making much more significant gains north of Turetsk. Fighting still is tough in Turetsk. The Ukrainians may be pushing back a little bit there. There were claims that they were in the middle of Turetsk. I haven't heard anything since then, so that seems to be a shame that hasn't worked out. But yeah, these grinding, increased areas of control are definitely a worry, as Konstantinivka is slowly encroached upon. Now, if you listen to Scruffy Tales, though, he says, if you add this up, it's taken them a month. Over a month to get from here to there. It is 300 meters a day. They are taking heavy casualties, and that is not a capitulation. It's not a collapse. It is an ordered withdrawal, but it is nonetheless a grinding increase in their territorial control. So definitely a worry. This is that highway that connects Konstantinivka, the T0504, and Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk still seems to be holding out. Not really many gains south of Pokrovsk, so that's good news there. It's the change up this highway that is particularly worrying, as it looks like the Russians are going to be more and more able to flank Minohrad and Pokrovsk from that northeasterly direction. And then further to the south of Kotlina, the Russians making fairly considerable, consistent gains there, marching on. But again, these things come at a cost, but it's a cost that the Russians are clearly willing to pay as they're moving on. Now, there's a lot of fighting around Bakhtir here. So the Russians are, I know there was shelling around this area, I think, but the Russians are fighting very hard over Bakhtir, and the Ukrainians are defending it. Russians were trying to get to the north around Olasivka and come down above Bakhtir, but that has been slow going. So the Ukrainians still fighting really hard to keep the Russians from fully equalizing this front line, holding them back there. And then when we come further south, further gains to, in fact, play for as talks about Turetsk here. When was this one for? This was yesterday. Sorry, I missed going through this one. Just a quick one on Turetsk. The Russian advances northeast of the city, Delivka, which I was showing you, are slower than they seem to be seen by only looking at geolocations. The part that worries most of the soldiers there is Yablunivka, the western part of which has been captured by the Russian forces, which are currently trying to push further. The threat is of reaching even Apilia from the west, bypassing Konstantinivka and cutting off the Ukrainian garrison in Toretsk city. Okay, sorry to have missed this out, but I'm going to go back. This could give us some useful understanding of what is going on here. So even of Apilia there, you've got Toretsk here, of course. That's where we're talking about Yablunivka as well. So, if they can get through there, get through here, then Konstantinivka is it's being slowly throttled, and that would also if they can get around here, take even Apilia and then move up here, then this whole area in between becomes incredibly fragile. So furthermore, I was able to confirm that Ukrainians still hold positions on the outskirts of Toretsk city, especially in the northern and western ones. Currently, the Russians are attacking the Terekon northwest of the city. So that is Terekon are these spoilings heaps, tailings heaps. So which one he's talking about there, I don't know, because there are a number in this area. And Andrew Perpetua say these all three are in the grey zone. So here it's interesting that Playfar says that the Russians are attacking the one in the northwest. He does give a geolocation. No info on whether they were successful or not. In fact, let's whack that geolocation in because I haven't done that for a long time. So the Russians are definitely attacking this one. We'll put it in. There you go. No results. Oh, thank you for that. Excellent. No results. So I have no idea where that one is. Hey ho. It said no results, but actually it was going to here. So it could be this whole area of mining infrastructure there. So that's where they raced to along this line. So that could be where they are trying to attack, where he's talking about. No info on whether they're successful. And the industrial areas to the western, on the western outskirts of the city, Sherbinivka and Petrivka hold solidly. No Russian advancements are recorded there. So that is here. And I don't know where else I'm talking about, but certainly in this area. So they're holding on, the Ukrainians there. At the moment, there are a lot of Russian hunter drones with nets and various other anti-drone equipment. This often denies the Ukrainian garrison stationed in the city's outskirts drone support because of this threat. I was able to get confirmation for the situation you see in the picture below. So there you go. That's a little bit on what's going on in Turetsk. Now, we'll go back to where I was because this is important. So we were talking about Bakhtir, but also the Russians getting very close to Dnipropetrovsk, only a couple of kilometers away. If we look at this claim, So Russians are about 2 kilometers away from Dnipropetrovsk region. According to the updated combat map from Deep State, for June the 5th, Russian troops have established themselves 2,020 meters away from Syczeslaw region border. The pressure in the direction of Novopavlivka is not decreasing. The offensive is being carried out by first 1 brigade and 2 regiments, with recently mobilized ones. Earlier, some channels reported about 560 meters to the region, but this information is not valid. It's being widely reported. Russians just half a kilometer there from the Dnipropetrovsk region border, says that. So that this is possibly what was claimed as not true. The occupiers have advanced near the village of Troitska, according to the military monitoring group Deep State. So let's just show you how close the Russians are to all sorts of areas around the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So this dotted white line here, it should come up there. Yeah, you got Donetsk on the right hand side, Dnipropetrovsk on left hand side. So that line comes all the way down here. Where they're talking about Troitska is actually further to the south. There's Troitska. So all around here actually is pretty close, but you can see, I mean, according to Survey maps, they're right at the border here, Novomykhailivka, but I'm not sure that that's what is agreed upon. See all this area there, all of that area, as far as I can work out, you see this, that is that tiny little blip up there on top. So that blip, as you can see, most of this area north is not controlled by the Russians at all. That blip is here, right? And all of that is not controlled by the Russians, according to Deep State and Andrew Perpetua. But according to Survey maps, the Russians control all of this area, and there's a massive difference there. So, yeah, I think that's worth understanding. So according to Survey maps, the Russians are way closer to Dnipropetrovsk up here, but they are very close in this area to Dnipropetrovsk. And as soon as they get a foothold in Dnipropetrovsk, they'll then write it into their constitution that that it's part of Russia, and that's what the Ukraine is going to be worried about. So they need to hold the Russians back all over this part of the Eastern Front line. But it's not just there as well, because I think there are other areas where they are close to Dnipropetrovsk, I think down here as well. So if we zoom in a little bit, yeah, so Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and Zaporizhia Oblast there. So actually around Zelena Pole here, much closer to the, what was it? That's Rivnepil. I'm just trying to think where this was closer to. Yeah, Velika Novosilka, goodness me. So, holy cow. So, Velika Novosilka, and then you had Vuhledar all the way over here. I mean, look at all of this area that they've taken. Krakova, they've come through there. So, they have advanced. The accumulation of all these advances does really take a toll on the map. But when you then, zoom out, you're thinking, okay, so 2024, 0.69% of the country at a casualty rate of 400,000. That comes at a cost, but they are very close to Dnipropetrovsk as well, around this, what would have been, I guess, a Velika Novosilka sector. So the Ukrainians around there pushing back, according to Surat maps, or there's a rejigging, but there's a continued, I think, striving to get to the Dnipropetrovsk border there as well. So, that's something the Ukrainians are going to have to look out for. And then when we come much further along to Kamianske, interesting that the Ukrainians appear to have had some success south of Kamianske, coming down towards, I played you a video, or at least read the subtitles for someone around the Pyatikhatki area, saying that it was just like meat assaults and they're losing all sorts of people around there. So it's difficult for the Russians everywhere, but of course, they can afford at least up to now to trade humans for kilometers. But it's interesting that Ukrainians have pushed back again around here, not for the first time. We saw this about a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, where the Ukrainians pushed down here, then they got pushed back, and then they seem to have pushed down there again. So it might be quite dynamic in that area, especially when both mappers suggesting that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back around Kamianske. So something to look out for there. But definitely challenging for the Ukrainians. The Russians making gains in a number of places, and particularly in Sumy as well. So we'll have to see what the Ukrainians decide is their best response there. They are going to be working hard on hitting at distance with their drone production, their long and medium range drone production up, as well as possibly having a greater degree of close air support for their troops, or at least the use of the guided glide bombs for their multi-role planes to hammer the Russians. Of course, the Russians do that as well with their CAB and FAB bombs too. So, fingers crossed the Ukrainians are going to be able to hold back to stem this flow of Russian advances in a number of the areas, but yet again comes at a cost. Now, I'll probably leave it for the next one because this has already been 15 minutes, but I do have a thread on the Ukrainian efforts to build a defensive line in Donbass, and you can see this map here showing some really significant trench lines being built much further back. So there's the Oskil River, Zherebets River coming up there, and the Ukrainians building lines much further back from there as well in the north, and much further back from the front lines as you would expect, because they want to protect their excavators and the people working on that, but making another layer of defenses around there, and all these other yellow lines indicating tree line trenches and other tank ditches and whatnot in these areas. So really significant building work potentially taking place, hopefully so that they won't be as unprepared as they were in some areas where, like Avdiivka, they didn't build stuff quickly enough. Anyway, I'll leave that for next time. In the meantime, take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.